Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. I have a distinguished panel today. I've got my friends Scott Ritter, Diane Sayre, and Joe Lombardo, who I haven't talked in quite a while. And we're here to discuss what's going on between the United States and Russia. So, Diane, I want to start off with you. Today is a really important anniversary. It's the anniversary of JFK's assassination. As a matter of fact, it happened um, right now. As I'm talking, and you mentioned the assassination many times. Why do you think that was pivotal in United States history?
Well, I think we see right now why it was pivotal in United States history. One, we never bothered to get to the bottom of it. The Warren Commission report was an obvious fraud, and everyone let it stand. And obviously, there were implications for people who were witnesses or knew the truth. A number of people suddenly disappeared or were killed, died in mysterious ways, but that the fact that we allowed that kind of a coup meant that the people who ran it would be running the country. And sure enough, it was followed by the assassination of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, the Vietnam War, the so-called rock, drug, sex counterculture, and the nation, in a sense, really lost its identity. Kennedy was a remarkable person in that he changed very much when he came into office. He became a better person. I was just visiting Hyde Park and remembered that Eleanor Roosevelt was definitely unenthusiastic about the Kennedy campaign, but later came around to endorse him. And we saw by his transformation in office and really culminating in some of the speeches that he was giving just before he was assassinated. And I'm thinking of his commencement address at American University, which came after the Cuba Missile Crisis, but where he outlined a way to have peace with the Soviet Union. And he spoke about how urgent that was for mankind. And then after that, he even proposed that the moon landing be a joint US-Soviet project, which people, I think, would find very hard to imagine under similar circumstances today. So I think this is critical because we're right now at the cusp of nuclear war. We don't even know who is running the country. There are press conferences going on where the media cannot get answers from our official spokesman about whether indeed Joe Biden did give permission to Ukraine to launch ATACMS to strike within Russia. And the situation is escalating, and there seems to be no one at the helm except for the pro-British US military and complex, defense, whatever you want to call it, blob running the United States. So that's why I think it's very, very important today that we remember him, that legacy, and that those of us who are here should resolve not to allow that coup to stand.
Joe, I had mentioned to you last week that I had gone to a forum, and the people conducting the forum was kind of like anti-Russia. You know, they portrayed Russia as the aggressor, and I was a little bit perturbed by the fact that they didn't have both sides talking. They didn't invite you. They didn't invite Scott. So, given the fact that this has happened since I went to that forum, do you think their minds have changed?
No. This is a section of the left which is pro-imperialist, that supported the imperialists when they attacked Libya, that supported the imperialists when they attacked Syria, supported the imperialists when They tried to destroy Russia through Ukraine. Basically, in every case, they come out with a left flavor of why they support imperialism. And they wouldn't have me because that wing of the movement, of the so-called peace movement, I don't believe they're actually peace activists. They just claim to be. That wing of the movement has been fighting us over Ukraine and just about everything else since the very beginning. I believe that part of their task and part of their role is to um, try to claim the peace movement for themselves and move people in a direction that we don't want to go in if we want to oppose war and nuclear war.
Scott, so all this hit the fan, I believe, on Sunday. Give us an overview of what's happened since Sunday.
Well, I mean, we have to go back a little bit.
Ed,
In December 8th of 1987, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev came together to sign the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. This eliminated some of the most destabilizing nuclear weapons in the history of the nuclear era, weapons that, had they been left to fester on European soil, would have inevitably led to a nuclear conflict. I want to bring that up because today we have intermediate range missiles back in Europe. One of them was just used for the first time in history by the Russians against Dnipropetrovsk, against the Yuzhmash ballistic missile production facility. And that may make it sound like Russia's at fault, but I want to remind people that it was the United States under then President Trump, and who will be President Trump again in 2019, who withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, setting us down this path, the path that Russian President Putin chided us about, because he said, your withdrawal from this treaty is one of the greatest mistakes you'll ever have made, because now you have this. While we're speaking, Putin just wrapped up a meeting with his generals. In this meeting, the generals declared that this new missile is ready, and he ordered it to go into mass production. And he said that it's already in mass production, and that this missile now will be formed into operational forces that'll be forward deployed. And these forces are ready to strike anywhere in Europe at any time. And they will strike anywhere in Europe at any time. The orders have been given, the decisions have been made. This is strictly a West acts, Russia reacts automatically. It is automatic. So anybody out there thinking that, well, we can call their bluff here, we can do something. The orders have been given, the decisions have been made. Anything we do will automatically respond in a decisive action by the Russians, destroying, because I think the destructive potential of this weapon was made clear for all to see the other day. So this is where we're at right now. And to be honest, the West has put itself in a very, very dangerous situation by allowing Ukraine to use ATACMS missiles, those are American-made missiles, and the Storm Shadow, British-made missiles, to strike targets in Russia, despite the fact that back in September, Russia said, if you do this, there will be a response. If you do this, you will escalate the potential of nuclear war. In September, they backed down. Now, apparently, they have changed their minds. We'll get to that in just a second. That's why I put the word apparently there. Because we could be witnessing literally a coup d'etat in America right now, right before our very eyes, where what we believe to be American democracy no longer exists, where people who were not elected are running the country and pursuing their own agendas that deviate from the stated will of the people, as manifested in a vote on November 5th that put a candidate towards the presidency who said he doesn't want to expand the war in Ukraine. He doesn't want to have a nuclear war with Russia. And yet we have policies today that are heading us in that direction. But we now have two choices. Either we capitulate, because that's what Russia has put us in a position now. We can't move forward. We can't do any of the things we were planning on doing without facing an immediate, decisive Russian response. So either we capitulate or we go to nuclear war. And here's the problem. Rear Admiral Buchanan, a senior officer in the Strategic Command, which runs all of our nuclear weapons programs, the nuclear forces, came out in response to Russia's publication of a new nuclear doctrine that lowers significantly the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. This was published earlier this week. If the Russians followed this doctrine strictly, they would already have launched nuclear weapons against us because we have violated the red line set in that document. But Putin has shown patience by simply responding with this non-nuclear response. But we are already at the threshold of nuclear war with Russia. I just want everybody to understand what I'm saying. We have already surpassed the threshold for nuclear war with Russia. We should all be dead, except Vladimir Putin said, I'll give you one more chance. So now the Biden administration is confronted. Surrender or go to nuclear war. And their nuclear war planners saying, we're ready for a limited nuclear exchange with the Russians. Literally, he said that. We are ready for a limited nuclear exchange with the Russians. A nuclear exchange says this is like chess. I'll trade my pawn for your pawn. No, a nuclear exchange means dead cities with dead people. Hundreds of millions of dead people. And the Biden administration just said they're ready to rock and roll. Why isn't America outraged at this? Why is America passive at this? Why are we still sitting on our goddamn asses? And I'm demanding that we get off our asses. On December 7th, we're putting together a demonstration in Washington, D.C. And we're going to stand up and tell the Biden administration, no, you will not do this on our watch. We will not accept this at all. And we're going to demand that the Trump team show up and make their voice heard. They must stand up to this. The American people voted and said, we don't want this war. Now, I know people say, well, I voted for Kamala Harris. You may have, but you didn't vote for nuclear war. Nobody voted for nuclear war. And the people that voted for Donald Trump, who won the goddamn election, said no, expressly said no. We don't want this, but Biden's doing it. So on December 7th, we're having a demonstration. Be there or show me that you don't give a shit about your life, my life, the life of your children, the life of America. Be there or just say, screw it, you want to die. Because that's what you're saying, ladies and gentlemen. This is no longer speculative in nature. This is the real deal. We are at nuclear war conditions with Russia. They are ready to blow us off the face of the earth, and our people appear to be ready to have a little exchange with them. Dance a little tango. Give up 100 million American lives. Right now, you won't live to see Christmas. That's the reality. If this is not stopped, none of you watching this will live to see Christmas. And I don't give a flying shit if you're sitting and go, Scott's mad again. If you're not mad, I have no use for you. Because if you think this is a frickin' joke, you're as ignorant as the day is long. We are all about to die. The Russians, just for the first time in history, launched a strategic weapon against a city. Fortunately, it was not a nuclear warhead. But they just put these missiles into mass production. And they're going to be flooding the area. That means that they're going to take out every target in Europe. And they're going to challenge NATO to do something about it. Article 5. You know, the one that says we all fight together. Well, Article 5, Joe Biden says it's a sacred promise. Really? Is Joe Biden ready to sacrifice 100 million American lives for a sacred promise for NATO's suicidal embrace of confrontation with Russia and Ukraine? Are the American people willing to die for this? This is what's happening. We already spoke and said no, but it's happening anyways. The President of the United States has not given authority for these long-range systems to be struck. The Pentagon has admitted that. They received no such instruction from the President. The President won't answer any questions about this. None. Who gave the order? Who told the Ukrainians it was okay to fire the ATACMS missile in? Tony Blinken. Who voted for Tony Blinken? Not a single person in the country. We have just had a coup d'etat launched against America that's pushing us down towards a nuclear war. That's the reality that we live in today. American democracy is being challenged not only internally through this coup, but its very survival is being challenged externally by the potential of a nuclear conflict. If you call yourself an American, if you believe in America, if you believe in life, if you believe in a future for your children, do something about it. Join us on December 7th. Otherwise, you're dead to me because you're going to be dead anyways.
Diane, you just campaigned for Senate in New York State. As you were going around and talking to people, did they express concern to you about the threat of nuclear war?
Well, let me put it this way. I am the only person who has successfully gotten on the ballot in the state of New York with the new requirements of 45,000 signatures in 5 weeks. Now for 2 election cycles, in 2022 when I ran against Schumer, and in 2024 when I ran against Kirsten Gillibrand, 2 warmongers, I might add. Kennedy got the signatures with a paid team, but due to a technicality didn't make it. The reason I got on the ballot is because when people would ask me or my volunteers, what was the issue? What does she stand for? The answer was she is against nuclear war. That a nuclear war is not the pathway to solve the economic collapse of the United States or the transatlantic. And it is the case that if you look at the polls, you have to realize we're under wartime propaganda. Now, it's not working. As you see, MSNBC is going to be sold off by Comcast. But what do you call it when the former head of the CIA becomes a major news anchor at MSNBC? It means you're under wartime propaganda. So not surprisingly, the opinion polls lie. So they say, oh, the number one issue in this election is migration, is something else. I went to an event with Bill Clinton, which I got hauled out of, unfortunately, before I could yell too much. A couple nights ago, Bill Clinton was there saying that the reason Kamala Harris lost the election was inflation. Well, maybe the reason she lost was because, first of all, nobody voted for her in a single primary. And second of all, because people associate her and Biden correctly with the genocide occurring in Gaza. And thirdly, because they know we are headed to a nuclear war with Russia. And contrary to the media, I found that this is one of the major things on the minds of the American people. They just don't talk about it because an environment has not been established, thanks to the mainstream garbage, where people feel comfortable discussing it. But I will again point out and rub it in, we turned in nearly 70,000 signatures based on that issue for me to be on the ballot, and Gillibrand and Sapercone and Optimum or Optum Online or whatever the TV station is called, Spectrum did not allow me in the debate because I would have been the one voice opposing their military policy. And my voice represents what the majority of the American voters actually want, as Scott said.
Joe, you do the peace demonstration every Monday. Has there been an increase in the number of people, and have the supporters that honk their horn, has that increased?
Oh, definitely. There's been a large increase in our weekly protests. A lot of support we see on the streets. A lot of it is focused on Palestine recently. And I think the thing is, despite the fact that we have a very controlled news media, corporate news media in this country and in the Western imperialist countries in general, um, people are seeing something very, very different today than just even a few months ago, a year ago. On the one hand, the United States and the Western imperialist powers are being defeated in Ukraine. That's why they're moving towards more desperate measures all the time. So it becomes clear that the U.S. can be defeated, that there are bigger forces. At the same time, the United States, like its vote the other day in the United Nations, is still opposing even a ceasefire in um, uh, in Palestine. And people are seeing, even though you don't see it on the U.S. media, you get it through TikTok, which is one of the reasons they want to ban TikTok. You get it through social media. You get it through Al Jazeera and a couple of other places, although we've banned a lot of the news media from coming into the United States. Um, what's really going on in Palestine, the war crimes and the genocide that's going on, which the United States not only supports, is responsible for. It is U.S. planes dropping U.S. bombs, U.S. money and U.S. political support that's responsible, along with a Zionist entity called Israel. So people are starting to see that the United States, even without the news media coverage, is not the great country that people in this country thought it was for many, many years. That to many people, that flag that's behind Diane is very similar to a Nazi flag in their minds, to the entire global South. And it should be, because the United States has killed millions and millions of people just in the past few years, and is supporting this kind of genocide. So we've been able to, for the first time since the Vietnam War, or at least since the anti-nuclear protests in the 1980s, have mass demonstrations in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of thousands of people have shown out. So I think the consciousness of people is changing. It's reflected in distorted ways in the elections because there's two pro-war parties. There was no discussion of the wars in these elections, of what's going on in Palestine or what's going on in Ukraine, but people are starting to get it. And that gives us the possibility of building the force, which is the masses of people in this country and around the world, that can oppose the United States and change policy. I know we don't have a lot of time. I agree with Scott that we are closer to nuclear war than we ever have been in my lifetime, including the Cuban Missile Crisis. But there are other forces around the world that are challenging the United States, that are challenging Western imperialism and U.S. capitalism, the BRICS and the Shanghai agreements and so forth, and masses of people in this country. And they're expressing it in different ways. And I think that gives us the ability for those of us in this country to continue to build a force and grow, just like our little demonstration has been growing each week, to try to stop the United States. Because the only people in the long run that are going to stop the United States are the people of the United States. We need to get rid of this government. We need to get rid of these undemocratic electoral policies that existed. We need to build a kind of movement that can change society and end war and end poverty and end injustice in general. And that's what we need to start working towards. And that's what we are working towards.
Scott, I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation the anniversary of the assassination of Kennedy. But as important as that is, I always think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. How much more danger are we in than in October of 62?
In October of 62, then President John F. Kennedy had close and continuous diplomatic contact with his Soviet counterparts. He had the ability to interact directly and indirectly with Nikita Khrushchev, and he communicated with Russian diplomats directly and indirectly. He had a front channel and a back channel. There was very little chance for misinterpretation. They spoke to each other directly, and this is why we got a result that prevented a nuclear war. Just to put this in perspective, Anatoly Antonov, the most recent Russian ambassador to the United States, departed last month. He has not been replaced. There is no Russian ambassador to the United States in place today at a time of the greatest peril of conflict between the United States and Russia. This is because the Biden administration ignored him, refused to meet with him, left him sitting there doing. Now, this is the man who negotiated the New START treaty. This is one of Russia's leading arms control experts. If you wanted to talk about preventing nuclear war, this was the man to do it with, and we ignored him. Major General Bobchik was his defense attaché. He was a strategic rocket forces general. In fact, when he came in duty, he was with an SS-25 unit in Novosibirsk in 1990 when I inspected it as a weapons inspector. That's how small this world is. He was here because he could talk about Russian strategic forces and the need to, what would it take to develop the confidence necessary to pursue disarmament. The day he arrived, the Ukrainians prevailed on the Washington, D.C. defense attaché community to blackball him, to deny him access to any of their functions, their gatherings. I attended numerous events at the Russian embassy, and at none of them were there any representatives of the United States or NATO or anybody else, defense programs. They ignored him. And in doing so, they didn't prevail themselves of the opportunity to become educated about modern Russia, about the needs, the wants, the desires of the Russian people. And that's why we find ourselves where we are today, because we don't talk to the Russians. We're ignorant about the Russians. JFK, in his historic speech at American University in June of 1963, talked about the need to basically get in the shoes of the Russians, to see the world from their perspective, not because we wanted to embrace their policies or say we agree with them, but we wanted to understand from where they came so that we could find a way to resolve this. I had a very good friend, William Polk. You may have heard of him. He was a distinguished diplomat and academic, professor at Harvard. But during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was actually in the inner circle of those advising John F. Kennedy about response. And he and I often talked about how Kennedy performed during this period of time. And again, the importance of diplomacy and the relationship that developed between Kennedy and Khrushchev, two leaders who saw their nations inch precipitously close to the nuclear abyss, and they together walked back. And they started a relationship, and it was a relationship that was growing, one where they were talking about meaningful arms control and improving relations between Russia and the United States and the Soviet Union. And then JFK was assassinated. And Polk and I have hypothesized, or we spent many hours hypothesizing, what the world would have been like had Kennedy not been killed. What if Kennedy had gone forward and he and Khrushchev were able to manifest some of these ideas they talked about, nuclear disarmament? We wouldn't be where we're at today. I mean, we had, America had that one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot, taken away from them by an assassin's bullet. But had Kennedy survived, and had he pursued together with Khrushchev these plans for peace, we'd be in a completely different world than we live in today. And that's the importance of talking about the vision of one man, and how visions of peace, can grow and be manifest. I'm not saying that Donald Trump is a JFK. It's the last thing in the world I would ever call him. But Donald Trump, of all the candidates that were running, the main candidates, Jill Stein, of course, can claim that she was something, but when you only get 0.04% of the vote, don't tell me that you were a meaningful force in this campaign. There were two candidates for president, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Kamala Harris spoke about the need for war, strengthening America, confronting. Donald Trump has said there's a need for peace, bringing an end to conflict, preventing nuclear war. Can he pull it off? Do you believe he's capable of pulling off? It's irrelevant. He at least has articulated a vision that is more closely attuned to the vision that JFK was promulgating back before he was assassinated than any other candidate in modern history. No other presidential candidate in modern history has talked the way Donald Trump has talked. I'd like to give him a chance. I'd like to see if maybe he can uh, do this, do the impossible. I did a meme in the election just so people don't think that I'm like MAGA and think Trump walks on water. I did a meme. I don't normally do memes, but this one I brought up the Avengers, and I don't know if people are familiar with that movie, but Infinity Wars, Endgame, Marvel, Iron Man. Um, but in there, the world's coming to an end, and this character, Doctor Strange, goes into the future to see all the different options that exist to prevent the end of the world. And he said he saw 14,600,000 and some odd thousand things. And Iron Man asked him, "How many of those did we survive?" He said, "One." And so at the end, when the final battle's being raged, um, Iron Man confronts him. He said, the world's going to hell here. Tell me, do we survive? Is this it? Is this the one? And he said, if I tell you, it won't happen. But then he points to him and makes him make a decision that would save the world. It came to that moment, the one thing that had to be done to save the world. And in the meme, I have him snapping his fingers instead of saving the world. I say, there's only one chance to save democracy in America. And I said, I am voting for Donald Trump. And that's how I felt. A 1 in 14 million chance to save America. I don't think Donald Trump walks on water. I don't think Donald Trump, frankly speaking, is capable of doing much of what he has promised. You take a look at some of his picks and they are insane. But he's the only one that has opened the door for the potential, for the possibility of not having a nuclear war with Russia. 1 in 14 million. Let's go for that chance. And every step forward we take, it becomes 1 in 13 million. The next step we take, 1 in 12 million. The next step, 1 in 10 million. And the further we progress down this path, the odds become better and better in our favor. If we sit on our asses and do nothing, it's 1 in 14 million. You might as well go drink a bottle of bourbon and watch the sun rise twice. The real one, and then the one that's going to kill you, the nuclear explosion. But if you want to live, start walking forward and watch those odds improve as you take control of your life, take control of these issues, and demand that this government doesn't kill us all in nuclear war. John F. Kennedy, if he had lived, I think would have created a different world than the one we live in today, one where we wouldn't live in fear of nuclear annihilation. Unfortunately, he didn't live, but his promise, the vision that he had, does, and we need to find a way to breathe life into it and make it manifest.
Scott, I know you're busy and you had a busy night with your our projects, but I've got one final question for you. Joe Biden, obviously his capacity has diminished. He can't think right. I'm sorry to say this, but he looks like he belongs in a old age home. Kamala Harris did not win a $1 billion campaign. Who's in charge here?
I just told you, Tony Blinken.
Okay.
Tony Blinken is in charge of our foreign policy. Tony Blinken sidestepped or somehow cajoled or tricked a befuddled, sick, ill, dementia-ridden man. Look, Biden isn't allowed to answer a question about this. Have you noticed that? He's not allowed to answer a question about what happened because the Pentagon has said he didn't tell them, nobody told them that the decision had been made to allow Ukraine to use these weapons. And Lloyd Austin was the funnel through which these decisions are made. Lloyd Austin went in September to Ramstein for the contact group. Zelensky flew in, stood next to him and begged him, let us use these weapons. And Austin said, no, the use of these weapons will not change anything on the battlefield. You will still lose. And we have a need for negotiation, and we don't want an escalation with Russia that could lead to nuclear war. We knew what the stakes were back then, and we made the right decision. Lloyd Austin made the right decision. And he overpowered Blinken, who was working with Rutte, the new Secretary General, and Starmer, the British Prime Minister, to get Biden to sign off. They were putting the full court press on Biden, that confused, befuddled old man. But Austin prevailed and said no. So how did they respond? They didn't allow Austin to speak to the president. The Secretary of Defense was not allowed to speak to the president about this issue. A decision was made without consulting the Secretary of Defense. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's not democracy. That's not the way it's supposed to happen. The Secretary of Defense is in the chain of command on decisions about going to war. The Secretary of State is not. And yet the Secretary of State, with the National Security Advisor, launched a coup d'etat, manipulating this tired old man who will not be allowed to answer questions about this. Congress needs to take action. And if Congress doesn't, then the president-elect needs to. I know there's pressure. I'm not talking about a coup. I'm not talking about violence. But the president-elect needs to stand up and appeal to the people who elected him and say, this shall not pass. This will not be allowed. You voted for a direction that is being hijacked by unelected people. And we can't allow, if you're going to save democracy, you have to call this out. You have to acknowledge that Joe Biden has been, his legitimacy, his presidency has been usurped. He's no longer a functioning president. Where's Article 25 of the Constitution when you need it?
You said save democracy. It's saving everybody's life in this world, right?
Yep. I just want to remind people, there's no such thing as a limited nuclear war. Don't let the Biden administration, don't let Admiral Buchanan fool you into thinking that we can have a nice limited exchange of nuclear weapons with the Russians and survive. The world will end. Read Annie Jacobson's book, Nuclear War Scenario. It's based on fiction, but it's a fictional book, but she interviewed dozens of former nuclear war fighters, people who commanded strategic command, people who advised the president, people who understand what the nuclear football is and how nuclear war will unfold. It's the most realistic depiction. Two things come out of this book. One, once, and this is the scary part, this is why I'm so angry. I'm trying not to get angry again because I know my wife tells me that when I start yelling at a camera, I diminish I diminish the ability to communicate. But I'm so angry about this because it scares me. The thing about Annie Jacobs's book is that once we pass certain thresholds, you can't stop nuclear war. And I'm afraid we've passed that threshold. I'm afraid we can't stop it. The second we have idiots in Washington, D.C. thinking that they can win a nuclear war, that's one of the important thresholds. Russia has lowered the threshold for their use. As I said, our policies have already triggered the potential for a nuclear war, but Putin is the only adult in the room. But he has come forward with a capability now that makes it impossible for us to back down and impossible for us to go forward. We need to find a third path, but do we have time for a third path? Once nuclear war starts, it can't be stopped. Once nuclear war starts, it can't be stopped. There is no limited nuclear war. And I'm afraid that nuclear war has started. We just haven't launched the first nuclear weapon yet. I am scared to death that we can't stop this. And then once it starts, 72 minutes later, the entire world ends. So all you people that think you got time, you don't have any time. Today, I'm just trying to tell people this. If Tony Blinken picks up the phone and gives permission for the codes to be passed down to the Ukrainians so they can fire the ATACMS missile at one more target in Kursk, and the Ukrainians do this, the Russians are going to respond like you've never seen. It won't be nuclear, but it's going to be so damn vicious and harsh that we will have no choice but to respond. And then they will take out our missile defense sites in Poland. They've already said so. They will hit NATO targets throughout Europe. They will hit London. They will hit Paris. They will hit everything because that's what we forced them to do. And then we have to come in with Article 5. And we have a stupid admiral that said we're ready to have an exchange with the Russians. That means that we will fire W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapons from a Trident nuclear submarine to send a message to Russia by hitting the sites, Kapustin Yar and others, with nuclear weapons. And the second those are launched, Russia hits the big button and everything flies and we all die. That's where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. That's where we're at. How do we stop it? How do we stop it? What I told you is happening as we speak. What are we going to do about it? How do we stop this? How do we find that third way, that third alternative, that other option that doesn't lead to either surrender, which nobody wants, or nuclear war? We have to pray that we have until December 7th. And on December 7th, we have to come together and we have to make our voices heard. Because otherwise, it's over. It's really over. That's how bad this is. This is as dangerous as it is. And we, the people of the United States of America, are asleep at the wheel. We've let a coup take place in Washington, D.C. The media isn't even talking about it. The media isn't even talking about it. The fact that orders were issued without the president's authority and without consulting the Secretary of Defense. Orders that are life and death issues for us all that could lead us down the path of nuclear war. That's where we're at, Diane. I'm depressed. I mean, Cynthia and Joe, I'm sorry. I'd like to be a little bit more chipper. You know, we could talk about, football. We could talk about, hell, what's going on? Is Tennessee going to recover to get in the national playoffs? We can talk about anything we want to, all these nice things. But none of it matters because we're all going to die if we don't stop this mad rush to nuclear war. This isn't a possibility. This is a probability. We've gone past the threshold of possibility to probability. Unless we can find a way to hit the reverse gear and back out of this.
Joe, final thoughts?
Well, first of all, I don't have the same faith in Trump as some others do. I don't have any faith at all, and Kamala Harris didn't vote for either of them. I voted for the candidate who I knew could not win and would not make an impact just as a protest vote. If Trump wants to end this, and the situation is as serious as Scott says, and I don't doubt it, he should get up today and say what's happening, not wait to the 20th, and say, there's been this kind of situation. We have to be out in the streets and we have to stop it. Scott, with the big voice that he has compared to the rest of us on this screen, on social media and other places, cannot put together a demonstration of millions in Washington, D.C. on December 7th. Trump can, and he won't say it. As Scott said, Trump unilaterally withdrew us from the intermediate treaty. It was Trump that sent troops in and took part of Syria, and we use their oil right now. We sell it. I do not believe Trump is a solution. I think the problem is really lying in the fact that the U.S. Western empire that has made us so rich by exploiting the rest of the world is falling apart, is dying. And unlike other empires, like the British Empire and the Roman Empire that have died in the past, there are nuclear weapons involved. And there are just as crazy people who will fiddle or in Blinken's case, play his guitar in Kiev as the world crumbles around them, but they are not going to solve it. Within the electoral system, within the political process in the United States, there are no solutions. The solution is only in the people, and we have to start building this. Things can happen very, very fast. Although the U.S. and the Western Empire turned the a situation that took place in Egypt and Tunisia into its exact opposite. In Egypt, in 13 days, they overthrew a government. The only solution is with the masses of people in this country getting together and doing something. There is no shortcut to that. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. I don't have faith in Trump. I didn't have faith in Kennedy. Kennedy invaded Cuba was the Bay of Pigs. I know everybody says he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do it, but he did it. He brought us to the brink of nuclear war in the crisis. He started the Vietnam War, which 40 million Vietnamese were killed. So, I mean, what these are two wings of a capitalist imperialist system. They deny every other voice in this society from being heard or the ability for another kind of party to develop in this country. They deny that. It's going to take a revolution in this country. And that's what we have to start building towards, and not telling people that maybe Trump can do something that will help us out of this situation. There's no easy solution. It's going to be very difficult, but we have to get together and start doing it.
Diane, final thoughts?
I actually don't think that anyone said that Trump is going to do this without the American people. And I think that there is also another pathway, which is the Congress, if they will move, some of whom are, I was just reviewing a letter by Keith Self, who warns Biden of this and who I understand is considering articles of impeachment based on this. But of course, as Scott said, we have a coup. I also think that the United States was not founded as an empire, although we are certainly acting like one now. We had a revolution against the British Empire. And if you look at the writings of Alexander Hamilton, Gouverneur Morris, Benjamin Franklin, they recognized, for example, that the institution of slavery was anathema to what they were hoping to achieve with our republic. And that was the point of the coup. That was the point of the War of 1812, the so-called Civil War, where the British were backing the Confederacy. And it's the point of what's happened right now to our nation, which is that we have become everything we fought, everything we listed in the Declaration of Independence, we are now doing to other nations. We have a chance because the powers that be did take a hit in this election, not because Trump is so great. He's not. But he said he doesn't want a nuclear war. That creates an opening which the American people are obligated to step into and act. We are supposed to be part of the republic. The reason why we don't have free and fair elections and don't have debates and don't have a democratic society is because the billionaire pro-war lunatics who are running the nation right now do not want the American people involved in that process. So I think everyone here is committed to the idea that we have to act, we have to make our voice heard, we have to force those people who claim to represent us to actually represent our interest, which in the immediate, short, simple term is merely survival, so that then we can fight out the other matters, because to fight out the other matters, we first have to be alive. And I plan to be there on December 7th if we're still alive. I don't think it's, I don't know why it happens to fall on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. Maybe that's appropriate. Hopefully not. Hopefully things will have changed dramatically by that point, because I'm not sure that we're going to get that far on the path that we currently are going. But there are many things that are happening that we don't see, that we are not aware of, and there is a global majority that rejects this insanity. And hopefully that global majority will make itself heard in the actions of the American people and our alleged representatives.
Thank you all. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Joe and Diane. Hey, Scott, get some sleep.
Now I got to finish this paper.
So thank you, everybody, and thank you for listening. So if you like this presentation, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Have a great day, everybody. Hopefully, we'll all be able to talk again. Thank you. Bye.